I think we're good. We're waiting for the panelist.
Just lost somebody.
So once he's back, we will get going. All right. Time to start?
Right now? 5 minutes ago?
Hello, everybody. We'd like to begin, so if you still need coffee for that late afternoon pickup, it's in the backhand, back left corner. Go grab yourself a cup or two. And hopefully you're here for the Sport and Social Work panel. So my name is David Albright, and I'm a faculty member with the School of Social Work, and will be moderating today. And what that is mostly going to be about is to read a question. They're going to respond, and we're going to open up for faculty, for audience members to ask questions. And so given everybody's spread out, I think I'm going to burn some calories tonight. My version of jogging from table to table to ask all of the wonderful questions that you will hopefully have for our panelists. How does that sound? All right. So to begin, we're curious to know how many of you played a sport at some time in your life. So most of us. How many of you are a parent, a guardian, a coach, a mentor of somebody that has played a sport? So again, the majority of us. In my own experience, I have 4 daughters. The oldest is 11 and the youngest is 3, and they're all engaged in sports, from football to tennis, even to golf. And my own interest in this field goes back to having played college sports. I was a football player 20 years ago when my 6'4" frame was actually big for college sports. It no longer is. And I think that for me, my interest is driven from that and is realized through my children. And so when Matt and others threw out this idea, I was like, rock on, let's do this. Most of us in social work have somehow been or are somehow engaged with athletes, with sports. And what we're going to learn tonight is a little bit more about what that looks like, some of the challenges within that, and how social workers can fully participate. Hopefully this sounds all right. And if so, we're going to begin by asking each of the panelists to quickly introduce him or herself.
Good afternoon. My name is Emmett Gill, and I'm with the National Alliance of Social Workers in Sports. I'm also a clinical professor at the University of Texas at Austin School of Social Work and Director of Student Athlete Wellness and Development within the Longhorn Athletic Department.
Hi, I'm Ginger Gummelt. I am an executive team member of the National Alliance of Social Workers in Sports, NASWIS. And I am the program director and assistant professor at Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas, and that's a BSW program. And I have about 20 years of direct clinical experience as well.
Good afternoon, Matt Moore, assistant professor, Ball State University, just north of Indianapolis in Indiana. So along with these beautiful individuals up here, and then one other executive member who could not be with us today, we serve as the executive team for the National Alliance of Social Workers in Sports. So we would remind everybody to please stop by our booth during the vendor time. We'd love to be able to talk with you more one-on-one about your interest and how it might be able to intersect with the work that we're being able to do. We also would like to give a special thanks to the University of Alabama for hosting us for this conference, the wonderful individuals at NASW Alabama who reached out to us to engage us in being able to do this panel, and of course to our great moderator back here, Dr. David Albright.
So we want to begin by asking the question, what do you mean by social work in sport? When it was first introduced to me, I didn't have a clear sense. I assumed I knew what social work meant and what sport meant, but the combination, I wasn't sure of. So to our panel, what does it mean?
I'll take it. So when we sit down and we really think about the whole wonderful world of sports that is out there, so there's a couple things that come into mind. One is the fact that athletes come to us with an inherent amount of strengths, talents, and abilities, right? And these strengths, talents, and abilities, we hope that these athletes are utilizing to go out and do great things within the community and to benefit themselves in both a personal and professional manner. On the opposite end of that spectrum, we also know that there are a handful of athletes that are out there because of the association that they have with sports, do experience a variety of different behavioral health and psychosocial risk. So it is trying to not only build upon the strengths of those existing athletes, but also try to help those athletes that we would deem as a vulnerable population to overcome some of those challenges so that they are, in essence, able to go out and be global citizens. So we think about all the athletes that are around us, whether you're a youth athlete. I've got 3 little kids. My youngest one will be 3 next month, is already engaged in a variety of different extracurricular activities. I wouldn't call them that. I think they just run around and hit each other with things. But they call it sports, so we'll call it a sport also, all the way up to kids that are playing competitive hockey and doing competitive cheerleading type elements. And then high school, college, and professional athletes, we know that there's a variety of different challenges that these individuals are facing throughout their upbringing and as they're growing up. And while I would say a good chunk of athletes are wonderful, outstanding individuals, they go on to achieve great things, they utilize sport as a platform to launch themselves in different directions, we know that a handful of athletes are not necessarily given those opportunities to be able to do things. They might come from families that have broken experiences, impoverished areas, coming from a variety of different family and domestic violence situations, experiencing depression, anxiety, disordered eating, and those are the types of things that as social workers, we think that we are extremely well positioned to be able to get in there and to try to figure out, not only from a strength-based perspective, but from an ecological and environmental perspective as well, how do all these factors within that athlete's life combine together to make the risk factors they are in essence experiencing.
I guess, and what I would add to Dr. Moore's outstanding answer to that question is just from a social work perspective. We not only have the clinical work that we do, but we also have the case management work that we do, program evaluation, and program coordination work that we do. And I think that that's one of the things, at least in my role, my first role my second role as a sports social worker, I'm most engaged in, and that's trying to corral our campus resources for our student athletes so that they're integrated into the community. Also, when I think about sports social work is the ethics that we bring. Whether you think about high school sports, where we had an instance in San Antonio where 2 of our kids, attacked the referee on the field, or when you think about college sports and probably some of the things that are going on at Baylor or the University of North Carolina, or you think about, professional sports and some of the issues that we see there. I think that when we think about sports social work, that we bring a certain ethical foundation there that can be beneficial to all levels of sport. Not that the folks that are working in sports don't have, good ethics, but I think that we can come in and reinforce some important things for athletes and student athletes that others might forget because of the lure of sport.
Do we have any questions that have kind of popped into any of your all's minds at this point? If so, raise your hand and I'm going to jog out there and you all can get your first real entertainment of the evening. And if not, I have one, which would be one of the core tenets of our discipline is to really work with vulnerable populations. And so this was mentioned earlier by Dr. Moore. And so a follow-up question is, can you talk a little bit more about how you really sell people that an athlete, irrespective of the level, could be a kiddo, could be an adult, in various organizations. How do you make that argument that they're a vulnerable population, perhaps in the same hand as someone who is facing domestic violence, or someone who is transient, or perhaps my background is with military vets, and I would argue some of them are. How do you work on building that argument of what is a vulnerable population and how you fit athletes into that? Go for it.
Okay, just to start with that one with the vulnerable population, for me, I think it's a piece of reframing how we look at these athletes. Because let's take the college athlete. Let's take the standard college student who goes off to school and faces the challenges of leaving home, starting the curriculum, starting life as an independent young adult. We know that that alone is a very challenging time for many, many individuals. So let's add to that the pressures and the expectations of the athlete, the college level athlete, the time demands that are on them, the expectations to succeed both on the field and academically. And then if they're not prepared adequately prior to that, then we have more issues there. So just looking at that one little sliver of athletics, we see how the athletics, although we glorify it sometimes, and we see it sometimes as so fantastic, we overlook all those pressures that are underlying it. So to me, it's not so much that we have to justify it, we just have to reframe how we look at it. It's, looking at them for what they're actually facing.
And the only thing that I would add to it is just a handful of statistics to throw at you. So I know the statistics are not always like the most entertaining thing in the world, but they work, right? So when you think about college athletes, right, there's been a consistent research that's been done in the area of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, alcohol abuse, substance abuse, disordered eating. And the statistics that are coming out of that are saying that roughly 1/4 of college athletes would identify as being depressed or anxious. So I did a research study not too long ago that found that 26% of athletes felt a moderate to severe need to go and seek mental health counseling services. So 10 to 15% of female athletes feel dissatisfied with their current body image and have low self-esteem related to their body image. 22% of student athletes report using marijuana. 6% of athletes report using banned performance enhancers. So while these statistics might not necessarily be high compared to the total number of athletes that are out there competing at all the different levels, what it does illustrate is that there is a catchment area within those athletes that really are experiencing some type of risk factors that as social workers we need to be able to step in and to intervene. I would go even further to say that it's not always just behavioral health issues that we see when we're dealing with athletes. I mean, I brought up this morning that, less than 36 hours ago, a track student athlete at Wheaton College was killed inadvertently by a hammer throw on their college campus. I mean, to think about having a social worker in that program that can then step up and provide grief and bereavement counseling, those types of things. The small percentage of athletes that do go pro, oftentimes needing financial assistance and career development, academic tutoring, all those different elements that go into what makes individual athletes end up being successful. It's not just the pure competition component, it's also the wraparound and the support services around them that oftentimes will dictate whether or not they go on and achieve great things or whether they don't.
Do any of you have athletes as clients? So how many of you might have kiddos that you work with that maybe they're engaged in a sport at their school or through an extracurricular? Perhaps playing a sport is an exposure, something that you need to think about, certainly in terms of risk, but perhaps also in the terms of a resilient factor, something that might be leveraged. You have a question?
I was just gonna, I also taught, my bachelor's was in education and as a high school teacher, and a lot of the things that were a resiliency factor was their, involvement in sports.
And I would just add, and I really need your participation here. How many folks work with the homeless population? Raise your hand. Keep your hands up. How many people work with foster care populations? If you do, please raise your hand and keep your hand up. How many folks in here work with students with learning disabilities? Please raise your hand, keep your hand up. How many folks in here work with single parent families, mothers or fathers? Raise your hand, keep your hand up. Student athletes experience all of these issues. There are a number of student athletes who compete at the NCAA and high school sports who are homeless, from foster care, come from single-parent households, and who have learning disabilities. And they're no different from the students who don't compete in sports and experience these issues. And how many people in here heard about the Jerry Sandusky scandal at Penn State? 4 social workers were familiar with what Jerry Sandusky was doing over an 11-year period before anyone stepped up to do anything about it. And all of those kids were aspiring student athletes. But then we moved to the pro level, and you have to understand that just because these young men and young women make all of this money, that all of a sudden, just because they make money, that they're not vulnerable. They're still experiencing the trauma and post-traumatic stress symptoms from their upbringing. It doesn't go away. And if anything, if they don't deal with it, then it can only get worse. And so, it's a great question. When we're asked, why is this considered a vulnerable population? Because, a lot of people just skip to the college scholarship or skip to the big-time contract without remembering where these kids came from. And if they haven't dealt with some of these issues, then they're certainly as vulnerable as they have ever been.
So moving on, I want to quickly get each of the panelists to speak about what brought them to the field of sport and social work. I shared a little bit about myself. I am not a researcher in this area. I have an interest in certainly supporting in ways I can, but again, my role of former athlete and as dad, as parents, as cheerleader to my kiddos.
In high school, I went to a pretty good high school. We had 177 students in our graduating class. I graduated number 175, ranked in my class. That's not from the top, I was at the bottom. I was so scared that I wasn't going to graduate that when we were walking in the line of graduation, I kept looking behind to see if the principal was going to come pull me out of the line. Because I had to do some pretty things that I wouldn't want to tell you about to make my way to high school. I went to play baseball at UNC and eventually transferred to UNC Charlotte, but I was what you call a Proposition 48. I wasn't able to play my freshman year because I didn't score high enough on my SAT. Once I did get on the field, I stopped going to class. And one summer, my baseball coach came to me and he put my bags out, my off-campus apartment. He went in my apartment, got my bags, got all my stuff packed up and said, once you want to be a student and an athlete, you can come back and play. And after that, I came back to UNC Charlotte, and I think I made, in the last 4 semesters in school, I made 1B. And that simply proved to me that the power of sport. There's some people who do anything to get on the field, and in that case, for me, it was that I had to go to the classroom and perform to be a student athlete. And so, when I was studying, doing my doctoral work at the University of Pennsylvania, I couldn't figure out what I really wanted to do. What area I wanted to study, whether it's healthcare, games, whatever the case may be. Long story short, I took some time off to take custody of my daughter, started watching NBA games, and at halftime just noticed that they talked about things like, crack-addicted parents and athletes overcoming that or their resilience, as our moderator mentioned, and I said, you know what, that's social work. And ever since, 1997, I've been involved in social work and sport.
Like Dr. Gill said, I have a background with athletics. Most of my life I was an athlete all the way through college, participated in college athletics. I was a gymnast. Yay. I have children who are in sports. I have one in a Little League baseball game probably about right now that I'm missing. So he's participating. I have daughters who participated in various athletics, sports, and I still coach to this day. I spent many years coaching. So when the opportunity came up to blend the research side and the practitioner side, I've spent 20 years, I was a practitioner working with sometimes athletes, sometimes children, sometimes adults and families. And when the opportunity came that this blending was, and this alliance was coming together, I knew this was where my heart was because it's been such a part of my life and I just have loved it. And as you all have mentioned, the resiliency and the strength that the athletics has brought to my life and to others that I've gotten to see has been so valuable.
So I approach this from 4 different lenses. One, as an athlete, so I grew up having the privilege of being able to play ice hockey and tennis. So ended up going to college on a tennis scholarship. So and still to this day play both adult hockey leagues and tennis leagues on a routine basis. So that'll never go away. Second element of it is I've had the opportunity to do a lot of coaching throughout the years that I've been affiliated with both sports. So I've started recently getting back into hockey as a coach, being able to coach my 8-year-old and his sport and light level teams. But I'm a varsity tennis coach in the Indianapolis area for a pretty competitive high school that sends a handful of kids each year to Division I schools on scholarship. So get an opportunity to see it from a coaching perspective, see it from the social work perspective. This is the one thing that I tell any undergraduate or graduate student that I've had in class, that at the end of the day, social work is what you make out of it. But your biggest goal should always be to try to find a way to combine your personal passions with the values and the ethics of the profession in which you love. And if you're able to do that, it never feels like you're working a day in your life. And I can honestly say I don't ever feel like I'm working a day in my life. So I'm doing exactly what I would like to be able to do. Fourth element of it, this is one I think resonates with all of you, is as a fan, right? I mean, all of us have these teams that we root die hard for, and I will tell you the social work values go right out the window when it comes time for my teams to be playing. I am the person that stands and screams at the television and blames this person and blames that person for not doing what they're supposed to. But you can't undersell that, right? Because, I mean, that is a part of who a lot of us are. So it's one of those barriers that as individuals that go into sports social work, you got to be able to set aside also. Right? I mean, because if you're working with some of these athletes for a team in which you admire and a team in which you respect, competition can't always come first. What has to come first is how well it is that you're developing those individuals. Those are the 4 lenses that sort of touch me when it comes to this field, and has been a large part of why I've been able to get involved in the things that I've got involved in.
Well, I hope that many of you heard some elements there that you could relate to. Again, I certainly can, and I think it's important to understand people's motivations for doing things, and hopefully you all can kind of see maybe your connection to this through their stories. The next question is, how does sport social work differ from sport psychology? So when I was asked to come up with some questions, I started thinking, I know psychologists working with athletes under this phrasing of sport psychology. I wonder how that's different than what social work is doing in this space. So y'all, they're going to respond, and hopefully we can get at least one question from the audience with this one, all right?
I'll start and then we'll pass the microphone down the line. So it's a couple of big differences between the two. There's some similarities between them also. So first, I would tell you that you need both if you really want to have successful athletic programs. So I mean, sport and exercise psychologists, especially those that do applied practice, have the ability to do a variety of different behavioral health, mental health counseling for athletes. The sports psychologists also, by definition, look at the factors that impact sports performance, which is different from the factors that ultimately impact the life of individuals. So you kind of need both perspectives. So let's not be naive. We want athletes that are going to go out to be able to give us the best on a field, a court, a track, whatever their surface might be. But we also want individuals that are going to be able to develop healthy and end up going on and doing other things within their lives. Since we know so few athletes end up going on and making millions of dollars, you're looking at 3 up here that make hardly any money off of the sports that they play. I wish that were not the case, but it's true. So, and then the 2 things I think social workers differ from a sort of a practice perspective is, one, we put a lot more emphasis on the ecological model. So looking at how microfactors, exo, meso, and macro factors all interrelate with one another to end up impacting the total overall well-being of an athlete. The second component, and Ginger probably can add to this as well, is the advocacy and the policy piece. So a big portion of our platform as social workers is that as we see injustice, it's not just to sit there and to watch it continue to go on, it's to figure out how do you influence policy, how do you leverage current events to help push your idea forward, how is it that you look at the historical context of things and put those into place with the modern times that we're looking at. And I think social workers have the ability to really do that and to influence things at a much larger level than, say, you can at just a direct practice level. That's not diminishing direct practice, but certainly policies can outreach to thousands and thousands of individuals, but in a day of direct practice, you're only going to be able to see X amount of clients.
Okay, so to add on to that, with that person and environment piece that Matt was talking about, that's part of our core social work. I mean, that's social work 101, person and environment. But I always go back to some of our core values. And the one that jumps out to me is social justice. And that's that advocacy piece. And that's that piece that the athletes, the coaches, the whole athletic arena, it's our role to step in and say, hey, there's unfairness happening here. And we say that in all sorts of platforms, but athletics should be no different, I believe. I also believe when we go back to our core values, human relationships, that's one of our core values as social workers, and we recognize the value and the importance of those. So we recognize that coach-athlete relationship is an important relationship, and it needs to be fostered, it needs to be developed. Our policies, our training for these coaches, for these people who are influencing these children and young adult and adult lives, that they're prepared to do that. And then finally, when it comes to the core values, I go back to the dignity and worth of the person. Because to me, that's a real core value, not only as a social worker, but for me as a human being. That dignity and worth of the person just because they are a person. And our athletes are no different, and we have to treat them the same way we would any of our vulnerable populations, any of our oppressed populations. That many, many times our athletes are the ones who have little voice. And we need to be that voice for them.
That was good. I don't know if I can add much to this and everything. That was
I mean, it's always good, but that was really good. Nice and not really good, but she was really, really good that night.
You know, in my experience, and I was the director of student athlete wellness at North Carolina Central University, and now at the University of Texas. And I would say a couple of things. I think, first of all, that the social workers that I know who are working directly with student athletes are good old-fashioned social workers. And excuse my French, they're not job sniffers. You know, they just don't want to be a part of athletics, but they really value the student athletes as a person. They really just want to help them as a person. They would help them whether they were a student athlete, a student, or someone who walked off the street. That's what I really appreciate about sports social workers, is that most of them are good old-fashioned social workers. I think the other part that makes us different is that with the folks that I know about is the practice, case management, and other things that I do, it's not just limited to student athletes. When I was at North Carolina Central University, I would say that 40% of my time was spent with coaches and athletic administrators. Because they're people too. And whether it's a coach who's trying to learn more about student athlete development and work better with their student athletes, or whether it's an athletic administrator who's dealing with a potential scandal, their name is at the bottom of the ESPN ticker. I was working with all of those individuals. I think the final piece is that, and I might be a little bit, favoring our profession a little bit, is I really think that our work benefits student athletes off the field and on the field. And I think that sometimes, maybe, some sports psychologists' work is performance-based, and some of those things aren't transferable to off-the-field situations. And I'll give you a prime example right now, working with anxiety issues with a golfer. And the same things that she is finding successful off the field, she's finding help her on the course. And so I think that those are the three differences that we bring, from my perspective, to the field of sport from a social work standpoint.
Any questions? Excellent. So I want you to hear that theme song from Chariots of Fire as I'm making my way.
So you mentioned that you spend a lot of your time with coaches and athletic directors. How much, as a sports social worker, are you able to use that influence to be able to coordinate with the macro within that, functioning within the agency, the sport program within the community as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spend half my time in the School of Social Work and half my time in athletics. I have a limited amount of time. So on the macro level, I am working with our Office of Health Promotion. our Office of Leadership and Ethics, our Office of Community Engagement, Residential Life, our Longhorn Leaders Program, and in my 3 or 4 months at the University of